An amazing story. When Khomeini, what, you know him? When he gained power in Iran, the Jewish community had no idea what this is going to be. Who is he? What does he want? What's he going to do? He held American hostages, you remember, yeah? And in America, they didn't know what to make of it. He's holding hostages, but he makes no demand. What does he want? So the State Department said he probably wants money. The Pentagon said he probably wants weapons. Everybody had a theory, but nobody knew. So the Secretary General of the General Assembly of the UN, I forget what his name was, he decided he's going to go to Tehran and find out what's going on. He got out of the taxi in Tehran and he was attacked by a mob. The police got him back into the taxi, took him back to the airport, and flew him back to New York. When he got out of the airplane in Washington, said they don't want anything, they just hate us. So the government asked Khomeini if clergy could come visit the hostages for their spiritual needs. And he agreed. So they went looking for non-Jewish clergy, and because there were 2 Jews among the hostages, they wanted a rabbi. But of course, he wouldn't allow a rabbi from the United States. And the UN said to him, would you agree to go visit the hostages? But we can't guarantee your safety. You could become a hostage too. So he said, let me call you back. He flew to New York, and he spent more than 2 hours with the Rebbe. He asked the Rebbe should go. The Rebbe said yes, and they talked for a long time. As he was walking out of the room, the Rebbe said to him, don't forget to take a menorah, a Chanukiah. And this was the middle of the summer. He thought, uh-oh. Why am I going to need a Hanukkah menorah? But he didn't ask. He went back to Mexico. He called the UN to say that he's ready to go, and they told him that Khomeini changed his mind and nobody's going. Months go by, and the United States and the UN still don't know what's happening with the hostages. So it came holiday season, if you know what I mean, the end of December. So they asked again, the hostages need their spiritual help. Would he allow the clergy to come? And he said yes. So the UN called Rabbi Hirschberg. The trip is back on. Are you still willing to go? He said yes. He packed a menorah. And he landed on the 4th night of Hanukkah. They took him with two priests, Lahavdil. They took him into the big room where they were holding the hostages. And of course, they knew that the room was bugged. So they were afraid to say anything. So after a little exchange, how are you? You feeling well? Everything's good? Yeah. They didn't know what else they were allowed to say. So they were a little uncomfortable. And suddenly they hear from the corner of the room, the Jewish hostages and Rabbi Hirschberg are lighting the menorah and they're singing. So all 50 hostages they all went to watch the menorah. Somehow, the word got out to the Jewish community that a rabbi came, they lit the menorah, they sang a song, and they're still alive. So maybe it's not so bad. There was a little hope. Friday.
Summer means longer days, more opportunities to explore, and cool moments you'll never forget. Inspire your summer. Get great lease rates on 2021 Seltos. Kia. That inspires.
From Spanish and Portuguese.
You have to cancel the, yeah.
Was the prayer day. And Khomeini was new, popular. Almost 1 million people came in front of the palace, in the street, to pray with Khomeini. So they set up a big stage for Khomeini and his family, another stage for the ministers, a stage for the visitors, the guests, and everybody is praying. And then at some point, they prayed down on their knees and fell on their face. Everybody, except Rabbi Hirschberg. Sure enough, 5 minutes later, an interpreter came from Khomeini's box, from Khomeini's platform. Khomeini wants to know why you didn't bow. Rabbi Hirschberg said, because I'm a Jew and I'm not allowed to bow to anything or anyone except Hashem. And you're praying in a language that I don't understand, so I couldn't take a chance. The interpreter goes away. 10 minutes later, one of Khomeini's sons comes to Rabbi Hirschberg and says, my father wants to talk to you. And he takes him over to Khomeini's box. And Khomeini says to him, through the interpreter, tell him that I appreciate his honesty and I appreciate that he doesn't take me for a fool like the ministers who did bow. So Rabbi Hirschberg said, tell your father that if he appreciates, he should give me an appointment. I need to talk to him. So they made an appointment for Monday morning in his villa. That Friday night, Rabbi Hirschberg went to the synagogue in Tehran where Rabbi Ezrachian was the rabbi. The streets were full of people because they heard what happened. He didn't bow. He's still alive. He lit the menorah. He's still alive. They all came to see this rabbi. The streets were so full that he couldn't get through to the synagogue. Finally, They davened, they prayed, and then at the end, he went up to the second floor of the synagogue, and he spoke to the people in the street from the window. Monday morning, he went to the villa, and they spoke all morning, all afternoon, for hours and hours. They spoke about everything. One of the things Rabbi Hirschberg told Khomeini is that the Magen David, name of the shul, the Magen David that is on the tefillin bag and on the Torah covers is not from the Israeli flag. It's much older. Khomeini said, oh, I didn't know. He called in a secretary and he said, send out letters to everybody. El kol Medina o Medina. That any Jew who has a Magen David on his tefillin bag or on the Torah cover should not be harmed. Months later, there was a war between Iran and Iraq. So there was a curfew. Nobody was allowed to be in the streets at night while it's dark. Anyone in the street is shot. It was the time for saying slichot, so you had to be in the streets while it's dark. So Rabbi Ezrachian sent a message to Khomeini that there's a problem. They need to be in the street at night or early in the morning while it's still dark. Khomeini gave out a ruling that any Jew with a Magen David on his tefillin bag is allowed to be in the street at night. What's the moral of the story? The moral of the story is, if you stand up proudly and you don't bow, then even somebody like Khomeini will have respect. What's interesting about this story, if anybody asks you, can Purim ever come out on Hanukkah? The answer is yes. Here is a story, a Jew who did not bow in the capital of Persia. And everybody said, you're going to get us in trouble. But because he didn't bow, just like Mordechai, everything came out better. But it happened on Hanukkah. So this is an interesting example where Purim came out on Hanukkah.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. So to go on, Rabbi Menachem White of Congregation Chevra Shas. Here's another story of faith. He asked me to speak about this memoir of my father's to a group of 80 secondary 5 students at Herzliya High School, just not too far from our synagogue. So I what do I tell these young people? Finally, I'm doing my life's dream is to talk about holding your head up high and not bowing down unless it's to God. So I said, here's your chance, you'd better do it. So I said, okay, the first thing I want to tell you all is Mazel Tov on this new building, on this beautiful new school, and Mazel Tov to your parents for sending you and allowing you, giving you a chance at a Jewish education. I beseech them to hold their heads high. On the day they pass the threshold in the halls of higher learning. So when I told them they're going to try in their curriculum, through their programs, through the words of the teachers, every hour of your class, to lure you away from Judaism. And you need to look inside and see who you are and remember that. Anyway, so, it went well. And I read a few passages from my dad's book. And they got a copy for their library. I was very proud. So when Rabbi Dr. White asked the students, you know, what did you gain from skipping hour for one class, skipping class for an hour? And one student replied, we got ammunition. I think that's what Rabbi Friedman was trying to give us through his talk about Khomeini and the rabbi. So I just want to read one other story of faith, and then we'll talk about the Ethiopian Jews who were, you know, for thousands of years, they thought they were the only Jews left on anywhere. They lived in isolation. They kept Shabbat, they kept kosher, they did everything the way the mitzvot are telling us to do. Shulchan Aruch, they did it all beautifully. So when they were brought in with Operation Moses and then Operation King Solomon to the Holy Land, to the state of Israel, they said, okay, so take us we want to go to the temple. We want to pray in our temple. And they were told, you're 2,000 years too late. So you know what they did? They cried. They cried and they cried. Talk about faith. Talk about loyalty. And today, if you go to Israel, the Minister of Immigration is an Ethiopian Jew of one of their big families. In the military, they have achieved the highest ranks. They're fighters. They're real fighters. I bet you if you go to Technion and anywhere else, the arts, they are stellar. So that is, we're going to reserve for Rabbi White and Rabbi Pinto. I'm sure they're going to have much more exciting things than I can pull together. But my last story is my father in prison. So I'm just going to read very quickly a passage from his book. I also had my own share of fear and anxiety as I served time in Khomeini's custody. One day, the microphone sounded my name, along with that of another cellmate, to report to the office. The entire ward sank into a deafening silence. Suddenly, a spasm of fear raced through my veins as my thoughts picked up on a signal that spelled trouble. As we both stepped out of our cell, a tall, stocky prison master received us in the hallway, looking suspiciously at my fellow inmate, a former army general of the Shah. He was told of a recent report that showed him to have blasphemed Islamic prayer among the occupants in our cell, and that I was said to have laughed upon hearing the general's anecdote. The stocky prison master made it clear to the general that as a Muslim, he was better off knowing what kind of punishment was reserved for such behavior. When the general denied the entire allegation, the chief warden called all the other cellmates into the scene and warned them to utter truth to the incident. Otherwise, each and every one of them was to end up serving in solitary confinement until further notice. Not a soul uttered a word, so we were told collectively to turn facing the wall. The chief warden summoned a reporter who soon entered the scene. We were unable to see the man as we stood with our backs toward him, but knew full well that his job was to document the identity of each one of us before execution. The big guy referred to our position facing the wall and remarked that it was a perfect occasion to mow us all down with the machine gun that he was sporting under his arm. And so, with my forehead against the wall, this is my father, I ventured to ask the Haji if I could say a few words. To my surprise, the request was accepted. Haji Dawood, I am a Jew, and I respect all religions. If I hear a Muslim saying anything against his faith, I lose any respect I have for him. Such a thing as presented to you did not happen at our place. A dead silence prevailed and lasted a few moments, after which the Haji dismissed us. You can all go back to your cell. Moments of dead silence lasted a while as some of my companions tarried in frozen disbelief, whereupon the big guy repeated the order of dismissal, and it was back to our cell where the walls had ears and where I was commended for my defense and handling of the situation. I told my shell-shocked cellmates that what I had told the big guy was the truth. It was only lucky that he believed me. My cellmates promptly reminded me that it wasn't the whole truth. So we made it our business to rehash the original scenario. The general had been reading a travel diary written by an Iranian who suddenly, at the call of nature, was unable to find the restroom in Baghdad's airport. His knowledge of Arabic was severely limited, most of it typically having come from prayers learned by heart. So he managed to muster from memory a line from a daily prayer ritual, habitually recited in the language of the Quran, in which the believer asks God to lead him in the straight path. With this helpful linguistic tip in mind, he approached an airport police officer and said in proper Arabic, "Lead me to the restroom." One may have attributed my good fortune in escaping danger at various points during incarceration to sheer luck, but I owed my luck to a trust in God, for I was truly grateful that he didn't allow me to recall this last anecdote at that crucial moment. Numerous anecdotes found their way into our cell discussions at any given time, but I reacted differently. My behavior may have cost us all our lives. So with that, I hand it on to our spiritual leader, Rabbi Pinto, and I won't do it before thanking him once again for giving us a chance to assemble like this and talk about faith. On to you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Dra. Thank you. Thank you for sharing all those beautiful stories about faith. If I could ask Rabbi White at this point to share with us a few words about the topic or about anything that comes to his mind. I'm sure he has something that he would like to share with us. Rabbi White?
Okay. You can hear me? We can hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So unfortunately, I do have to leave. I was going to say 8 o'clock. I'll try to stretch it a couple minutes. I have to do a couple things. We say
that's okay, because I have a beautiful autobiography that I can read about Rabbi Sharon.
Okay. So I'll
that he did for Brandeis University. So
right, okay. I'll speak for a few minutes. Brandeis is Brandeis has connections. You know, I studied in Brandeis, and after I got my smicha, I studied there. I got my master's degree in the Department of Near Eastern Studies. So I have to leave because I have 3 things I have to take care of now. One is that I have my aunt who lives by herself in Boston, and Beli Ayan Aga, she's 104 years old, and we meet, we talk regularly, and especially Thursday night, we go over the parasha. So I really have to go to that, And then also I haven't prayed the mincha yet, and I go to the synagogue near my house to smoke a mincha, and I also have a nightly chavuta with my son, who lives in New Jersey, which is the miracle of WhatsApp. We're able to meet together. So, but I'll speak for a few minutes then, and then I'll leave it over to you, and maybe you'll send me afterwards the article by Rabbi Sharon. As far as Rabbi Sharon, to say a comment of Rabbi Sharon, I know he was going to speak tonight. I spoke to him. I've been in touch with him. I spoke to him today, and I just don't know what happened, because he told me that even though he wouldn't be able to speak in person, because remember 7 o'clock here is 2 o'clock a.m. in Israeli time, but he was going to prepare. I suggested to him that he would prepare a video to speak to the people, and he was excited to do that, and some computer glitch must have happened, and I am surprised. Rabbi Sharon, we became very good friends. I brought him here a couple times to Montreal, and a very interesting person. He's an Ethiopian, of course. He was born in Ethiopia, and studied at one of the great yeshivot in Israel, known as Yeshivat Har Etzion, and he became a rabbi. Became a rabbi of the, ironically, of an Ashkenaz congregation, and he's done a lot of work in popularizing and explaining the issues of Ethiopian Jewry. So I'm sure the essay that Sandra is going to read to us will be very interesting. And by the way, he is going to be here. I spoke to him, and he does hope to be here in the near future, back again in Montreal.
We should invite him.
Yeah, so I have to find out exactly the schedule. He didn't know himself exactly when he's going to be, but we're going to be in touch, and he's going to give me the information, and we'll see what we can do about that. But that, absolutely. And he's going to bring with him a whole bunch of kesim. Now, a kes is a spiritual leader of the Ethiopian Jews.
Wow.
They don't call it a rabbi, they call it a kes, and it's going to come with several of the kesim, and so it should be interesting, and we'll keep you informed as soon as he knows more about it, and I'll know more about it, and we'll be in touch with that. Let me just make a couple brief comments on what was said tonight. I was thinking about the word emunah. Now, what does emunah mean? And I'm wondering, there is a verse in the Torah when Moshe Rabbeinu was giving the people encouragement, and because they had been attacked by the nation of Amalek, and there was a war going on between Israel and Amalek. Israel was in the desert. They had just crossed the Dead Sea, and they're suddenly attacked by Amalek. And Amalek was a pretty rotten group. They especially went out of their way to attack the weaker people. And Moshe held up his hands as a way to inspire people. People were looking at him. But not just at him, they were looking, as the Mishnah tells us, they were looking up to the heavens and being inspired by God. Matter of fact, the Mishnah says, I remember they put it to a tune and said, "V'chiyadav shel Moshe osot milchama onotzchot milchama." Do you think the hands of Moshe were making the war? But no. Ella lahagid lecha kol zman shehayu Yisroel mistaklim klapei mala v'hayu mishabedim. Right? And they would devote their hearts to Avim Shebeshamayim, and it says Hayo Hayu Hayo Hayu Hayo Hayu Menatzachim. Whenever that would happen, they would win. and he would give them inspiration. But it says, the Torah says there, Vayehi Yadav Emunah. And Emunah, commentators explain, refers here to strength. His hands, he was able to keep his hands up for all this time. He did have some help, as people were helping him hold up his hands. But I'm always shuddered when I see that, because I remember when I was in grade 3, and there was one boy in the class who was misbehaving, and the teacher made him stand up and keep his hands up for the duration of the period. Now, if the teacher would do that today, the teacher would be immediately fired. But I remember that. And so when I first learned that pasuk, that Moshe is holding his hands up, I said, wow. But because emunah means strength. One of the interpretations, Avihi Yadav Emunah. And emunah gives you strength. And I found that myself this year. As you know, this has been a difficult year for me. Certain things have happened, many things that you don't know has happened. Everything seems to have fallen on top of me this past year. And of course, the main thing, of course, being the sudden passing of my wife. She had been ill. She had been ill in October, November, and she was in the hospital. So she wasn't that well, but she came out and she was functioning better. And then unexpectedly, she passed away on Sunday morning, March 15th. But I think emunah, belief in Hashem, gives me the strength. And bitach, it's interesting that bitachon, I think, might be connected. You know, you say in Hebrew, ani batuach, I'm certain. Or an Israeli will say, betach, of course. And that's bitachon. I know it's going to be okay. I have emunah. It gives me the strength. Belief in Hashem gives me the strength. And bitachon, I know it's going to be okay. I don't know exactly what's going to be, but I know it's going to be okay. So that's a couple things that I wanted to say as you were talking about these words. Another thing, you mentioned the mitzvah, and the rabbi who said that mitzvah, instead of saying mitzvah, he substituted the word connection. And again, it's interesting. There's a etymological connection here. In modern Hebrew, a tzevet, from the same root, means a group of people. A tzevet, a crew, is a tzevet. In Aramaic, they say betzavta, means we're all together. So that's what a mitzvah is. That's one of the functions of mitzvah, is that connects us to Hashem and connects us to other people. And it connects us here in the synagogue. This is a mitzvah. So it's a mitzvah, it's coming to synagogue. That's why I'm anxious to get back to synagogue, because there's such a conceptual difference between, there was a time when I was just davening, I was praying in my house. It was nice, it was nice. And I remember even last year on Yom Kippur, I was praying on my back porch. And it was nice. It was very nice. It was a beautiful day. And we have all the greenery in the backyard. And we had the animals and the birds and the squirrels and the trees. And it's beautiful. But coming to synagogue and being together with other people, but sevet, biyachad, it's a completely different experience. And we join together. So I wanted to mention that. And one other thing that you mentioned, the rabbi who wanted, after the Holocaust, who lost his family. So that was the Kloisenberger Rebbe. And he established a hospital in the city of Netanya. It's called Laniada Hospital. Mm-hmm. And the hospital was known as a hospital that really was concerned about the patients. Not an easy thing to do in the hospital, but really that was the goal, to really be concerned about the patients. It's interesting that the Kloisenberger Hasidim were religiously, from the point of view of Jewish law, very similar to Satmar. They were connected. They came from the same general area as Satmar. But there was a big difference because Kloisenberg had a much more positive attitude towards Israel, much more so than
after all that he had been through.
Yeah, I mean, we can't imagine that. I mean, it's just, what is it, 14 children he lost.
11 kids and his wife.
11, and his wife. I mean, yeah, we can't imagine that. We should never know anything like this from anybody, on our worst enemy. We should not know that. But so this is just an amazing, tremendous example of bitachon and emunah that there could be. I'll just say something about Rabbi Sharon. I'm sorry he's not here, but as I said, Rabbi Sharon, who besides becoming a rabbi and becoming very active in an organization called Tzohar, which is like a modern Orthodox organization in Israel. Many of Israelis, especially more non-traditional Israelis, non-religious Israelis, have found it very difficult to relate to the rabbinical establishment in Israel. And this organization of Tzohar was set up in order to be like we are here. We try to relate to people who might not be that observant to that traditional as we are. For us here in America, in Canada, this is natural. But for the rabbis in Israel, they're not used to it. I remember once, my brother went on Aliyah many years ago. He graduated college, and as soon as he graduated, he went right away and went on Aliyah to Israel. So Baruch Hashem, he has 5 daughters. They're all married. They all live in Israel. So the marriage of one of the daughters, so they asked me if I would be Mesadeh Kedushin. So technically I couldn't be because I didn't have a license, but I conducted the wedding. And I did it as, I would conduct the wedding here in Montreal. I would conduct it, speak to the Chatan, speak to the Kala, talk to them, and it's the way I would do it. And afterwards, so the Chatan came over to me and said, Todah Rabbah, he said to me, thank you. Oy, Todah Rabbah, איך שסידרת לקידושין ואיך שניהלת לקידושין, how you conducted the chuppah. He said, I never saw a chuppah like this. I said, what did I do? I said, this is just the way I do it. Nothing special. But they just weren't used to that in Israel. And so Rabbi Sharon is one of this Tzohar group that tries to bring the rabbinate closer to Israel. And of course, the other thing, he has now been appointed to be the head of a program in Israel, a branch of what they call Shalom College in Israel. And this program is a program for the history of Ethiopian Jewry. So it's like we have now, Lahavdil, but we have in America and in Canada, minority groups. And many of the Ethiopians, unfortunately, did feel that they were discriminated against. And this is a program to give pride to the Ethiopian Jews and to study from in a university scientific method the history of Ethiopian Jewry. So he's the head of the program. That's his program.
That's amazing.
So
thank you.
Okay, so you'll have to excuse me because I really...
You don't have to excuse yourself, Rabbi. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And we really are heartfelt about your wife. There's no words.
I've said to some people, I thought over the years that I was a good husband. I thought, I tried to do what I could to help my wife. But it's only now that I really appreciate everything that she did and she did for me and what we did together. It's only now that I miss her, and I really appreciate that. But
God bless you, Rabbi.
Okay.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for. This was sort of a surprise. I wasn't expecting to be speaking tonight, but thank you for.
Well, we have to thank Rabbi Pinto.
Okay, Rabbi. Oh.
Take care.
Okay, very good. And enjoy your vacation, Rabbi Pinto.
Great speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
You should realize, you should call Hazaku Baruch Rabbi Pinto, because I think he's on vacation now, but he specially took off.
Thank you.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
if Rabbi Pinto allows me, I'll go really quickly. I read fast, but it's a beautiful thing. And he wrote it for Brandeis University. And I find that it's autobiographic. So he says, my story, Rabbi Dr. Sharon Shalom. My Ethiopian name is Zaud Tesfaye, and today I'm known as Sharon Zaud Shalom. I first heard of Eretz Israel when I was a small child in a village in Ethiopia where I helped herd the sheep. When I asked where Jerusalem was, my grandfather pointed in the direction of the city for which we yearned. When I was only 8 years old, I came to Israel by myself with my aunt and uncle. I was certain that my parents were dead, and I went to live as an orphan in a children's home in Afula. As a child in Ethiopia, I thought that Jerusalem was made of gold. I dreamed of a land of milk and honey in which everyone was Jewish and the Gentiles did not hate them. In the village, we continued dreaming of Jerusalem. Rumors began to fly around our village and others that Jews from Jerusalem had come to Sudan in order to help the Ethiopian Jews, the Beta Israel community, to go to Israel. The gates were open and whoever wanted to leave could go ahead. None of the villagers thought of waiting. We all did everything possible to get organized and start moving in order to go up to Jerusalem. Every item that could be sold, we sold. Whatever we couldn't sell, we left behind in our clay huts. After 2,000 years, we began to internalize the idea that the road to Jerusalem was open. One night, when the sign to begin the journey was given, the residents of several villages gathered at a meeting point and began the great trek to Jerusalem. Our hasty departure led to complications. In my family, we kept our donkeys, so sometimes we rode, but most of the group journeyed on foot. We walked for over 2 months from Ethiopia to Sudan, exposed to the dangers of the road. People were certain they would reach Jerusalem within a short time. But in reality, some of them were forced to wait in the Tawawa refugee camp in Sudan for as long as 6 years. Conditions in the camp were harsh. It was overcrowded and sanitary conditions were deplorable. The path from this situation to outbreaks of infectious diseases was short. Thousands died of disease. In consideration of this situation, the Mossad and Jewish agency Aliyah representatives did their best to help the interned Ethiopian Jews. They worked to improve conditions and speed up the stream of Aliyah, all the while operating under stressful conditions and a heavy pall of secrecy and fear. On the one hand, they tried to push up the pace of Aliyah, while on the other, they had to be careful not to arouse the attention of the soldiers of Ja'far Nimeiri, president of Sudan. My family was in the camp, and we were told we would have to wait 2 or 3 years for our turn. The mortality rate among children in the camp was particularly high. So some of the parents decided to send their children ahead of them to Israel to try to save their lives. I was the eldest child in my family. At 8 years old, I was told to go with my aunt and uncle to Jerusalem. I was torn between my love for my family and my love for Jerusalem. I followed my parents' wishes, along with hundreds of other children, adults, and elderly. I was packed into a crowded truck. The bed of the truck was covered with a heavy tarp, and we were off. Conditions inside the truck were foul. It was terribly crowded and hot. People vomited, and the smell was unbearable. No one dared to make a sound. Even the children and babies were silent, as if they also realized they had to keep silent or else put all of our lives at risk. We didn't know where they were taking us or how much longer we would have to travel in this horrific state. Finally, the truck stopped, and we heard a powerful racket outside. The tarp was lifted from the truck bed, and we climbed out. The roar intensified. I had no idea what it was. Then I saw an amazing sight, something I had never seen before. I saw water, more and more water, that erupted and writhed fearfully. This was the shore of the Red Sea, my first glimpse of the ocean. It looked like a wild beast that hadn't been fed for weeks, and it moved toward us, jaws open, but from inside a cage that confined it. I can hardly describe my fear at the sight of the powerful waves pounding toward me. I didn't know they would stop the moment they reached the shore. Then suddenly a miracle happened. From out of this nowhere, from deep within the darkness and the fog, the tumult and the confusion, commandos from Unit 13 of the Israeli Navy rose up out of the sea. They shed tears, and we cried along with them. It was a meeting of two brothers who had been separated for 2,000 years. The soldiers loaded us onto rubber boats. It was a dark night, and the boats floated silently into the sea. After a while, the boat reached what I thought was a large, well-lit building, an Israeli naval ship. The boat passengers climbed up through the belly of the boat onto the high deck. Some of them kissed the deck, convinced they had arrived in Jerusalem. Only the next day, when the sun rose, did we realize that we were on the deck of a boat in the middle of the ocean. We sailed to Sharm el-Sheikh in the southern Sinai Peninsula. Then we were taken off the boat and driven in buses to the local airport. From there, we flew to Ben Gurion Airport, our gate to the promised Jerusalem, the first step in a reality that for many years had been only a dream. In January 1982, I stood in front of an immigration ministry clerk at Ben Gurion Airport. Through a translator, I was asked my name and age, but I was at a loss for words. 2 years previously, I had acted without a word. And here again, I lost the power of speech. I barely managed to pronounce my name in a whisper. For over 2,000 years, our people recited the prayer, "May our eyes behold your return to Zion in mercy." After an absence of 2,500 years, the Ethiopian Jewish community has merited the return to our homeland. We have returned to our home. This is why when I stood before the immigration ministry clerk at the airport and was asked my name and age, my throat was choked and I could barely utter my name. I went to live in a children's home in Afula. At one point, I received the bitter news that my parents were no longer alive. For 2 years, I lived with the knowledge that I would continue in this world without my family. The Emuna Children's Center provided for all my needs, and my uncle and my aunt and uncle, Betuli and Tedu Sisei, whom I did not know in Ethiopia, became my family. Then one day, The Children's Center director, Baruch Vassen, called me to his office urgently. I went in and sat down cautiously petrified and I thought I had done something wrong. Then he told me that the news I had received 2 years earlier about my parents' death had been a mistake. My entire family was alive, and the night before, they had made Aliyah in a major IDF operation, Operation Moses. I took a shower and put on new clothes in preparation for the meeting. My counselor, Gabi Ohayon, drove me to the immigration office in Or Akiba. That trip, which took just half an hour, seemed like an eternity to me. We got out of the car and walked toward the immigration center, tense and with anticipation. We quickly found the right house. We knocked on the door and my mother opened it. We embraced and wept, and I felt that I was experiencing the miracle of the resurrection. When I arrived in Israel, there were very few Ethiopian Jews in the country, and I felt foreign and strange. I had the constant feeling that people were looking at me, thinking I was a character who had come out of a popular Israeli children's book, The Little Black Boy Goes to Kindergarten. I felt different, foreign. I remember that feeling of otherness from when I was still in Ethiopia, from the other side of the coin, when a representative of the Jewish agency came to our village. We considered him a feregi, a foreigner. Still, we desperately wanted to meet him because he was a Jew who came from Jerusalem. In Israel, it was difficult for me to reconcile the differences between the dream of Jerusalem and the reality. But I know it was harder for the adults than it was for me, a child. My identity became a central question. Who was I? In Ethiopia, I was identified as a Jew of Beta Israel. They called me Israel. But ironically, here in Israel, I was called Ethiopian. To me, it was a jarring experience to discover I was an Ethiopian. Later, I discovered that my Ethiopian name, Zaudeh, had been changed to Israeli name of Sharon. I was pleased to have this name because people explained to me that this was a new name from Jerusalem. Wonderful, I thought, but that led me to ask, who am I, an Israeli or an Ethiopian? What does it mean to change your name to an Israeli one? Or on the contrary, to keep your Ethiopian name? Was society a factor that pulled me down and kept me back? Or was it a motivating factor that pushed me forward? I also asked, why am I different? Is difference a blessing or a handicap? Is this society racist or not? I had to reformulate my identity. How should I go about it? I was confused. Furthermore, I constantly heard conflicting voices. Some said that Israeli society was racist, while others said it wasn't. Some said we had to throw our Ethiopian identity out of the window, but some said we should preserve our traditions. I heard these two voices even within my own family. One day I asked my grandfather, Abba Dejan Mengashe, of blessed memory, "Grandfather, how old are you?" He replied, "I'm 8 years old." I was astonished. 8 years old? How can that be? He answered that the moment he set foot on the ground of Jerusalem, he began to count the years of his life anew. I was thrilled. With all the complex reality of life after Aliyah, my grandfather still saw the light of Jerusalem. One day, my uncle, my grandfather's son, came to me and asked, do you think we have democracy in Israel? Of course we have democracy, I replied. He countered, no, we have no democracy in Israel. The only place where there is democracy is in the cemetery. I asked him why he thought that. While my father was alive, he lived in a small apartment in the immigrant absorption center, while the mayor of our city lived in a fancy neighborhood in a large house. After my father's funeral, I saw who was buried next to him, the mayor. Finally, they became neighbors. He continued, you see, democracy exists only in the cemetery. I listened to both my grandfather and my uncle, and I asked, which one of them is right? Shortly after this happened, my grandfather died. He was a man I esteemed greatly, who had a powerful fear of God. He was righteous and honest. He knew the book of Psalms by heart, and he was a Jew with all his heart and might. He had a pure soul. I asked myself, where does he sit now? In the Garden of Eden? I thought that beyond any doubt, my grandfather must be sitting in the same room with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Aaron, David, and Solomon. He was sitting with all the tzaddikim, the prophets, the Tanaim, and the Amoraim. Then I reached an earth-shattering conclusion. A man like my grandfather, whose worship of heaven was based on the Ethiopian tradition, had reached the status of sitting up there with all the righteous people? For the first time, I understood that there were many channels to worshiping God, and all of them are equally legitimate. Over time, I learned that everyone in the world has difficulties and challenges along the way. I tried to avoid asking questions like, why did they do that to me? Why did God do that to me? Why is it my fault? None of the immigrants to Israel have had it easy, no matter what country they came from. Countless Jews suffered indescribable horrors in the death camps in Germany in the Second World War. Some were saved and came to Israel, but they weren't expecting government aid for new immigrants. They picked up weapons and went out to fight in the War of Independence in order to establish a state. Many of them met their deaths. This had a big impression on me. People might call me naive, but this quality is what has pushed me to examine the reality of Israeli society and discover that society is a given condition. Society does not make personal claims against certain individuals or groups. Each individual determines how to interpret society, whether in a positive or negative light. I, like my grandfather, have chosen to emphasize the good side of Israeli society, and I have found much to appreciate. Today, I have a PhD in Jewish philosophy from Bar Ilan University, where I teach courses titled Culture, Halacha, and the Tradition in the Ethiopian Community, and Tolerance and Pluralism in Jewish Sources. I'm also a lecturer at Tel Aviv University in the African Studies Department, where I teach Ethiopian Jewry, from ghetto to segregation. I also serve as Rabbi of Kedoshei Israel, a community of Kiryat Gat that was established by Holocaust survivors. I am married to Avital, a highly educated woman. She has a degree in social work from Hebrew University of Jerusalem and a master's degree in art therapy from Lesley University, who made Aliyah from Switzerland as a young girl. We are parents to Roy, Nadav, Ziv, Gil, and Tohar. After over 2,000 years of exile and wanderings, we are proud to live in Kiryat Gat in the Holy Land. It is truly a miracle of the revival of the Jewish people and a sign that the redemption will soon be coming. So if that's not faith, I ask you, what is?
But those words were magnificent because they're true. He covered everything. He shows his faith. He shows the pain he went through and how he came out on the other side. And I love the statement that society doesn't make you or doesn't interpret who you are. You interpret what society is. You find your place. You define society. Like that shows the ultimate independence. You know, you're not going to, if they think badly, if something's badly of you, too bad for them. I really liked what he had to say. I was under the assumption that Sharon was a female. So when I heard the rabbi speaking and referring to him, to the rabbi as a he, I had to rethink everything. That's why I wondered what division of Judaism he had, or she had become a rabbi of. So now I understand. Okay, and I'd love to hear what some of the congregants have to say, you know, about him, because he brings in the new immigrant experience, a whole lot of differences, and it seems like his wife is Ashkenazi, so there's a lot of blending and what he picked up and the mixture and compromises. I'm sure it'd be great to listen to both of them talk. Anyway, that's it. But I loved what he had to say.
It was a very pointed point that you made. A very good point. You picked out that one part about society out of all that he said. That was really brilliant what he said, and you picked it up. Thanks for pointing it out to us, Gigi. Does anyone have any questions?
I just want to say that shows his independence of mind and his wisdom. I think he's a wise man and a strong man.
Yeah, and he happens to be the first Ethiopian Jew to be ordained rabbi in Israel.
So the Kes, I think they're called Kes. They're the spiritual leaders, but they're not ordained as rabbis in Israel.
Oh, but he is, I guess.
I know he is, but the others, they are just, I don't understand the difference. They haven't studied certain philosophies, I guess, and they haven't passed exams, something like that. I don't know, because the Kes are the spiritual leaders.
So I thought if we have just a little bit of, you know, an atmosphere of everybody hanging in there still, I have a very short poem, this time from Rumi, a Persian poet. You know that the Persians have poetry running through their veins. And this one is one of the very greatest ones, Rumi. And this also talks to me about faith. And I hope you like it as much as I do. So this is how it goes. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain all. If they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whomever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond.
Beautiful.
So gosh, thank you so much, everybody, for staying up till the end. Thank you for being there.
Great program. Thank you.